All right, we're live. Any questions from Ayurveda training yesterday?
I might have some questions about turmeric when that comes up.
Okay.
Not yesterday.
Good. Well, then I have questions. So, start with you, Simraya. So, what is the best food category for Vata? Or what are the kind of qualities of food that are going to be most beneficial for
For Vata, things that are warm,
Mm-hmm.
Sweet,
Mm-hmm.
and grounding.
Yeah. So what food categories are more warm, sweet, and grounding?
I think of like cooked, or like baked fruit, like baked apples or baked pears, things that are a little bit grounding, so heavy, so some grains,
Yeah.
oats,
Yeah.
maybe one of those, rice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all the grains are great for Vata.
I think of like apricots and prunes and cherry berries and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. Yeah, is that what you're looking for?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they also, Vata also does well with most meat, dairy for the most part, because those are also kind of grounding, heavy nuts and oils. You know, their digestion is a little bit sensitive, so you have to be careful with those heavier foods, not overeating them, but they can be very beneficial. Thank you. Jennifer, what are some foods that are imbalancing for Vata? So are challenging for them?
Cold foods.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't want ice cream.
Right. They might want it, but it wouldn't be
Yeah.
balancing for them.
And then more of the drying grains like corn.
Mhm.
Good.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess just the lighter foods.
Would not
Like
be-
a dry, or like a regular apple instead of
Right, as opposed to a baked or a poached apple. Yeah. And, well, a good one to remember for Vata is beans. Because beans are considered to be dry and astringent, so they can be a little bit challenging for Vata as well. So we have to antidote them with lots of spices, soak them, cook them well, use lots of oil in their preparation, and that will help more easily digestible. Yeah. Elizabeth, so what are some food categories that are good for Pitta?
Okay. Pitta being, and I'm trying to get this right, I forget. Pitta is it fire and ether for Pitta?
It's fire and water.
Fire and water.
Yeah.
Okay. So food categories that are good.
Mm-hmm.
Pitta, fire and water. Some definitely not spicy foods
Yes.
in excess or very much.
Yes. Because they always have that. They have that fire already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Salty foods not so good
Not
for
so good.
Pitta because
No.
it's gonna ask for more water in the body. Essentially.
Salt is heating.
Salt is heating.
Yeah.
Okay, is the main
Yeah.
one to point out. Okay. Let's see. Heavier foods would be good. So grains
Mm-hmm.
and beans
Mm-hmm.
in their drying astringent quality for the water portions. Let's see. Sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Is
Sweet
good.
taste is balancing
Mhm.
for Pitta.
Okay, and I would say that's all I can guess
Okay.
for that one.
So Pitta is interesting because Pitta being fire has very strong digestion. And so because of the strength of digestion, they do really well with almost all the categories of foods. So the main thing to keep in mind with Pitta is because they do have such a strong digestion, they tend towards you eating very complex, rich food, and that can be imbalancing for them. So they don't do well with really rich food, with fried food. Those types of foods can be really imbalancing for them.
Okay.
Yeah, great. So we'll go to Kapha. So what food categories would be beneficial for Kapha?
Things that are bitter, not things that are sweet, because that already is kind of a process for them. Things that are a little more light and moist. So, like I would say like soups. So when you're eating vegetables, is it that way for fruits too? To have them be a little more hydrated than dry because of the earth quality.
Actually, for Kapha does better with dry fruit because the moisture in the fruits is actually can be aggravating.
Okay. All right. So dry fruits. Bitter, astringent too. Would be really good. So I think of like bitter, like greens. Being really important for them to have. Even like as far as dandelion greens, sometimes that's
It's not bitter.
dense and not bitter.
Dandelion greens, the bitter taste is most balancing for Pitta. And so it's actually the pungent taste that's the most balancing for Kapha. And so definitely vegetables in general are going to be the most balancing for them. But anything that's a little bit spicy, has a little bit kick, a little bit of a kick, a little bit stimulating, is going to be really, really helpful for them.
But not really heavy. So like as far as dairy, oils, and animal products.
Yeah, those are not beneficial for Kapha. Yeah, those are the ones to avoid. So, great. Alright, so let's move on. So today, let me get my little program here. So today I just wanted to start with, I don't really have a handout for this specifically, but I wanted to start with this concept of Vikriti. And so Vikriti,
Sorry, you're still looking at this one.
I don't really have a, we'll be looking at all three of them probably. And so let's look at, to start when we talk about Vikriti, if you guys have this one with the Samkhya, I think it was the second one that I gave you. And then going to the page, I think it's the third page, it says Basic Principles of Ayurveda. So I'll just go over these basic principles and then talk about Vikriti in relationship to those. So basically we've been talking about Prakriti, our own natural constitution. So the idea is to come into a balanced state from that constitution. And so how we determine every system of medicine has a kind of a different typology. And so in Ayurveda we use Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, but in homeopathy they have a different system. Chinese medicine there's a different system. Cherokee medicine there's a different system. Western herbalism. Each system kind of has its own way. And it's just a way to assess the vitality and strength of the patient and kind of create a predictive quality of what might happen when you incorporate different foods or different herbs or different lifestyle practices. So, it's kind of predictive. So, these basic principles, the first line of defense is considered to be removing the cause. So, if it is a dietary thing, like let's say you have a kapha imbalance, and you eat cheese every single day, the first thing to do is to stop eating the hard cheese, and that's going to stop the mucus and the phlegm and the obesity and the swelling and any of those kind of kapha type symptoms that we talked about before. So first the cause has to be removed, and then once you've removed the cause, we're using this principle of opposites, and that's really what we've been exploring so far, is if you're hot, then you use cold. If you're dry, then you use moist. If you're heavy, then you use light. And so that the principle of opposites is basically allopathic, and so that's often associated with Western medicine. but it's a kind of a principle of medicine that if you're this one thing, then you use the opposite thing to cure or to get the momentum moving in the opposite direction, so that the person can become balanced. And then the last premise here of these basic principles are supporting the digestive fire. So we haven't talked a whole lot about the digestive fire, but we've talked about kind of these specific foods that are best for each of the different doshic types. And really the reason that those foods are so well aligned with each of the types is because they maximize the efficiency of the digestive fire. So each one of us has kind of a predisposition towards being able to digest some foods better than other foods. And so because of this, then if we're giving our body the foods that we naturally are going to digest more easily, then that creates more energy for the system, more balance in the system. And that energy can be used other places besides digestion. One of the big things that separates us humans, Homo erectus, from most animals, or from Homo sapiens, or from apes and everything else, is that we have a relatively small digestive tract compared to our nervous system. And so at some point, and I believe it correlated to us learning how to use fire to cook our food, we were able to pre-digest our food through cooking. And so our digestive system was able to adapt to that and became a lot smaller. And so that extra energy was then used for our nervous system and started to create our nervous system. Whereas the other, most apes never learned how to use fire. And so they have a much more complex, much larger digestive system than we do. And so that is being able to manage the digestive system, optimize the digestive system, gives us tons of energy for our nervous system, basically, for taking in data, information, remembering it and everything else. So when any of those things kind of go out of balance, then we come into a state which is often called the Kriti, which is, you'll hear it two ways basically. One as imbalance and one is current state. So Prakriti is a kind of our constitution, but how we are right now, currently, is usually associated with our Vikriti. And hopefully, the Vikriti and the Prakriti are one, meaning that there is no imbalance, that we're completely imbalanced. But if there is any imbalance, any excess in any of the doshas, then the first thing that we do is treat that imbalance. So that's kind of a common misconception that I come across a lot of times, is most of us, I think because we're an individualistic culture, tend to focus on Prakriti, tend to focus on our constitution, but that's actually a misnomer unless you're completely imbalanced. And that you can be a Vata Pitta individual and have a Pitta Kapha imbalance, or have an imbalance that is not your constitutional imbalance. So if you were a Vata Pitta and you were doing Vata Pitta things, you actually would throw yourself more out of balance until that initial imbalance has been unraveled and you've gotten yourself closer to this state of balance. So that's the concept of the Kriti. I think it's worthwhile to take the Kriti questionnaire and just kind of see, where you're at, because of that push to kind of do this constitutional management. And then you'll see, it's clear to me that I have a Vata imbalance. So then you start to work with the Vata balancing herbs, the Vata balancing lifestyle, all those kind of Vata balancing things. So on 2 pages away from that, where we just were, it says Ayurveda and remedies. And so these are pretty broad categories of remedies, but this is mainly what is utilized in Ayurveda to bring the system back into balance. So the first one is diet modifications, which we've talked a lot about. The second one is the lifestyle and activity adjustments. And so we haven't talked about that as much, in general, there's kind of, we usually, as far as looking at lifestyle and activity, we look at how each of these doshas relates to energy. And so, do you guys know like the two main types of energy, by chance?
Dark and light?
So there's kinetic energy and there's potential energy. Have you heard of those?
Yeah.
So vata is associated with kinetic energy. So it's associated with the activity. Kinetic energy is basically anytime you do anything, you're using energy to do something. And then kapha is more associated with potential energy. So it's the energy that we store for a rainy day when we need all that vata energy to do things. And pitta is kind of in between. It, in a way, kind of manages the expenditure of energy. It determines whether better to do more kinetic things or better to do more potential things. And so, kind of the analogy that I like to use with this is the sympathetic nervous system. So we have three ways that we respond to stress: fight, flight, or freeze. So anytime there's stress, that's how we're going to respond. Imbalance usually arises because there's stress, right? It's how we respond to the stress that determines whether we're going to have an imbalance. And since we're constantly being stressed, everything basically is a stress, how our nervous system consistently responds to that then creates this groove that then will create an imbalance in the system, if that's the groove that we consistently go down. So which of the doshas do you think predominantly has the flight response? Vata. Yeah. So there's this old story, I don't even know if it's like in an ancient text, but basically there's a hunter in the woods and he's got his gun and he shoots his gun up in the air and the antelope immediately runs away. So the antelope has kind of similar vata characteristics, and so it's gone. So how about fight? Which of the doshas has this? Pitta, right? So the tiger hears this gunshot and is like, "Who's in my territory?" And they starts to like go towards the gunshot instead of away from the gunshot. So, and then the last one is the kapha, which is the freeze response. And so that often correlates with the elephant. If the elephant hears the gunshot, it goes back to drinking water. It's like, it's not really that interested in what's going on, so to speak. And so these are all kind of sympathetic nervous system grooves that we get stuck in. And we consistently will respond to stress by doing more activity, this vata type thing, by trying to confront the stress head on and blow through it, a pitta type thing, or withdrawing and not having anything to do with it, which is a kapha type thing. And just like the doshas, we have a tendency in a certain direction, but yet we use all three. Just like we have a tendency to be one of the doshas, and yet we're all three of the doshas simultaneously. So how we adjust our lifestyle and our activities are really based on trying to minimize those stress responses and support the system. So most of the lifestyle and activity adjustments for vata are going to be to have them do less, because their natural tendency is to do too much, and so doing less will really help them. Whereas with pitta, the main lifestyle adjustment is to do less goal-oriented things, to play more, to have more fun, to spend more time with friends, to do less work-related, goal-oriented type A type things. And then with kapha, it's kind of the opposite, is like stimulating them a little bit, and trying to use some of that potential energy that they've been storing up so that they're having more activity. So all of the lifestyle adjustments, you'll hear like vata should sleep 10 hours, pitta should sleep 8 hours, kapha should sleep 6 hours. And that's basically just this working from that idea. Depending on the individual, depending on the imbalance, that may or may not be true, but that's kind of the framework on which those recommendations are based. Then we have the herbal supplements, which we're talking about in the herb training. We do have some information about yoga on the website that talks about, this Vata type practice, Pitta type practice, Kapha type practice. But it's basically the same as what we talked about with the lifestyle and activity adjustments. Vata, slow, calm, focused practice. Pitta, a little bit playful, lighthearted, soft eyes, soft practice. And the Kapha, more of like your vinyasa, fast-paced, get your blood pumping, sweating type of practice. So each one of those is going to be more balancing for that particular dosha, or bring the imbalance that's there, the Vikriti, back into balance. I won't really talk about the Marma points. That they're beyond most people's comprehension, because they're considered to be like access points to consciousness. And so the word Marma usually means secret. They were secret teachings. And so it's just kind of beyond the scope of this. And then cleansing practices or processes. So normally in the fall and in the spring, we'll do kind of a Ayurvedic cleansing process, which usually involves lots of ghee, lots of herbs, a little bit of castor oil, khichdi diet. Those are kind of the main three components that you'll see in an Ayurvedic cleanse. I think Michelle mentioned I'm doing like a New Year's repatterning class the first 3 weeks in January, which basically is like just helping people align with some of these Ayurvedic principles. It's almost like a support net for people, where you have a class structure and you have a way to kind of like facilitate getting in harmony with your own natural rhythms. And so I provide some kind of general rhythms and ideas, and then you work with those and you figure out what sticks, what works, and then you kind of move forward from there. So it's just this kind of repatterning process. So yeah, it's going to be really fun. So any questions about that?
I guess I do have a question about Vakriti,
Yeah.
because I've never heard that word before.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I missed the definition of that in the beginning.
It's basically either refers to imbalance or refers to your current state.
Okay.
So the idea is that action is imperfect. And so because of that, it's inevitable that your current state will be somehow imbalanced from your natural state. If the imbalance is severe, then we need to treat that as an imbalance. But if it's very minimal, then we don't. And so the way that the Kriti questionnaire on the website, like determine your imbalance questionnaire is that you take those questions and they're weighted differently, and then it'll come up with your imbalance. If you don't have one, it'll say, oh, you're balanced, no big deal. So if you have like one or two little things going on, it's not going to generate a result. But if you have, 3 in this category and 3 in that category and 3 in this category, then it's going to come up, oh, you've got a tridoshic imbalance. All 3 of these are out of balance for you right now.
Okay, great. And I didn't realize that there was one on the website for that. So
There is.
I'll
Yeah, it's like determine your constitution and determine your imbalance.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's an important questionnaire to do. So next, I think we're going to talk about, back to the one that I gave you yesterday, where we just covered that first page, talking about pure consciousness and all that. And then we'll go to the second page and we'll just briefly look at this definition of Ayurveda. There's actually 2 primary definitions of Ayurveda that are used. And this one comes from the Charak Samhita, which is one of the 3 main texts. And the other one comes from the Shashut Samhita, which is another big text. So this one is mind, soul, and body. This trinity we call the human being rests upon the unified field of consciousness. The whole world arises and is supported by this underlying unity, just as a tripod is supported by the ground beneath it. This unified field of consciousness, the absolute transcendental reality, is called Purusha, is the source of life, animate and sentient. This is the true subject of the Veda we call Ayurveda. It's for the sake of knowing unity consciousness that this science is brought to light. Approximately down. So that kind of goes back to what we were saying before, is that the body, mind, and soul basically are an expression of absolute consciousness, and it's, in this life, the opportunity is to connect with that more deeply, and then that allows the life to actually be an outpouring of a unified feeling of that source. The other one that you'll often hear, if I can remember it right, is Sama Dosha, Sama Agni, Sama Mala, Kriya, Indriya, Svasta. And so basically that's saying when the waste products are balanced, when the doshas are balanced, when the sense organs are functioning properly, when the tissues are balanced, then there's health and happiness. So it takes a much more physical look at the system and saying, okay, well, once all these things are balanced, then when the mind will become, happy. And so this takes a more kind of esoteric view. So Ayurveda encompasses both. It looks also the physical frame and how to maintain that, but kind of as a precursor towards a deeper understanding of things. So I just wanted to bring that in quickly because basically the definition that you'll come across most often is the science of life, or this science of longevity. What is it that Kevin likes to call it? He likes to call it like the science of self-awareness. I think that's a really good definition because ultimately that's what that's what this vocabulary is all about. It's like, okay, what are the 5 elements? How are they playing out in my body? How are they playing out in my environment? And understanding, getting a little bit of a predictive quality to see like how that all works together. So if you take water and you take dirt and you put them together, you're going to get mud, right? And so it's a kind of the same idea. Like if you take this food and you put it in my body, you're going to have a specific result, whether that's like efficient, strong digestion, feeling alive and healthy, or whether that's like compromised digestion, feeling kind of under the weather. So once we start to get that self-awareness, then it's easier to know how these things will affect us instead of just like taking somebody's word for it and saying, oh, gluten's bad for me, oh, cheese is bad for me. Instead of actually having the self-awareness and know to be enough to know, like, oh no, this is actually really good. Like the teacher that I mentioned the other day, whose best food for him is cream of wheat. So that was a process of self-awareness, not just like listening to the dominant marketing in the culture and then following, whatever the authority figures in the culture are saying, and actually building that relationship with self so that you can know whether or not this is good for you. So that's kind of the ultimate goal of Ayurveda. And what really allows that to be possible within the system is this substance called Ojas. And so Ojas is an interesting substance because it hasn't actually been found in the body, but I'm sure it will be eventually because science keeps proving everything that Ayurveda has been saying for thousands of years. And it really, Ojas is this substance that's often associated with vitality, immunity, strength, and the way that I look at Ojas is it's like the kind of the container. So it's the container that contains all the energies of the system. And the stronger the container is, the more the container is capable of holding really intense energies, or holding confrontation, or holding stress, or holding any of the things that we come into contact with. The stronger that container is, the more capable we are of dealing with those things. So the more Ojas we have, the more capable we are of dealing with whatever life brings us, because obviously we don't have control over that. And so it's really our response to that determines how that situation is either beneficial for us or how that situation is detrimental towards us.
So would you say that Ojas is kind of like chi?
No, Ojas is more like Jing. is what it's called, the kidney essence. It's more like that. So it's more like the container that holds it all. It's like this source of everything. Chi is more like prana, which is more like vata. And so Ojas is more like Jing, which is more like kapha. And so as we talked about with kapha, it's like the structure, the stability, the immunity of the system. And so Ojas is basically refined kapha. It's the kind of the refined essence of the physical body, so to speak. So when there's Ojas, then it makes everything easier. So a lot of times what I'll find in clinical practice is that the doshas will be out of balance, but in order to bring the doshas in balance, there has to be adequate Ojas. So Ojas is kind of the vitality of the system. It's the system's ability to heal itself. And Ayurveda is the science of self-healing, and so the belief is that we can and are capable of healing ourselves of any disease that ever comes our way. But the kind of premise behind that is if we have adequate Ojas. So building the Ojas is often primary to treating the doshas or to rebalancing the doshas. So whatever we can do to kind of strengthen the Ojas. So just a few qualities of Ojas. It's everywhere inside the body. It maintains the integrity of the body. And then we can tell if we have Ojas because it's on the skin. And it's often said that we have a healthy glow. And so I remember this last cleanse that I was doing in the fall, I had a couple people in there, and they would like go to the grocery store and they would have 2 or 3 people say, "Oh my God, you're glowing. What are you doing?" And like, "Oh, I'm doing this fall cleanse," and then people's like things shuts off, and you're like, "Oh, cleanse, I can't do that." But like 2 or 3 people, and that was really the essence of the cleanse, because the idea is that the channels have to be clear in order for the Ojas to build. So analogy that I think is a little bit helpful for that concept is if you have a hose and then you have like a blockage in the hose, like a big piece of mud or dirt in the hose, and so you're just getting a little trickle of water in the hose. So Ojas is kind of like turning on the water. So keep turning on the water and keep turning on the water pressure, but the mud's not going anywhere. So the trickle is identical, even though there's tons of pressure behind it, and you keep like putting more tonics into the system and trying to increase the pressure. But if you clear out that piece of mud, then it's easy, right? Then all that energy is able to move through, and it really supports the system. So that's kind of how cleansing and Ojas go together. It's like first we have to clear the channels, and then the channels can carry all the tonic herbs and all the revitalizing essences that we're putting into the system. Ojas is considered to be the end product of perfect digestion. So the reason that we focus so heavily on digestion in Ayurveda and consider that basically the cause of disease happens in the digestive system is because when the digestion is perfect, then Ojas is created, and Ojas is the vitality that then keeps all of the doshas in balance. So Ojas is really kind of the goal, the end result of perfect digestion, and we can monitor the Ojas by this healthy glow that we're looking at. I probably won't go into this too much, but Ojas is also considered to be the substance that connects consciousness and matter. So basically, it is the physical substance in the body that allows us to have this experience of source, to have this experience of the soul, to have this experience of the absolute reality beyond. And when our Ojas is low, we won't have that experience. And so we'll theoretically be able to think about it and go, oh yeah, I'm sure there's a divine entity out there somewhere that I'm connected with, but I don't actually feel that. But through building the Ojas, you can feel that, and so it's like connecting digestion to spirit, right? Like if your digestion is good, then you're given the opportunity to actually have an experience of the divine, which is a pretty remarkable It's like, oh, well then I know where to work. You just work there. So meditation is a great way to increase ojas. A balanced diet is a great way to increase ojas. Ojas is very closely linked to positivity. So positive feelings, positive behaviors, all of that is going to increase ojas as well. For example, is love, joy, and appreciation. Like I talked about before, one way to increase ojas is to do a cleanse. So here on ways to increase ojas on page 3, this is Panchakarma or Ayurvedic purification therapies. That's basically a cleanse of sorts. And then we talked briefly about the rasayanas. So the herbs increase ojas. So of the ones you guys have covered before, Amalaki, Ashwagandha, Shatavari, Vidari, Kapikachu, Gukshura, Bringaraj, Bacopa, Shankapushpi, Tulsi, Arjuna, all of those are going to increase ojas. All of those are considered rasayanas, they're all tonics, they're all going to build the vitality and energy of the system really beneficially. So decreasing ojas can happen as well. Anytime we have stress, negative emotions, hurrying, excess exercise, excess fasting, overexposure to the elements, not sleeping. Sleep is one of the primary ways that we replenish the ojas of the system. It's really important to get adequate sleep in order for the ojas to be replenished. They just did that. This study, the New York Times just cited a study that's really cool where they're working with people with depression, and they gave them basically some Ayurvedic sleep routines, like don't sleep in the same room as your electronics, use your bed only for sleeping and sex, not for reading, go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time, all these kind of very Ayurvedic recommendations, and they had a huge increase in the success of the depression drugs that they were using in combination with those sleep recommendations. And so now the kind of dominant therapy in depression is starting to move towards treating insomnia first. And when you give people these sleep routines and they're actually sleeping, when they build the ojas, then they're more able to deal with the psychological disturbances that are happening. But if the vitality isn't established, then you can't do that. So kind of back to vata works in the mind. We want to balance the vata if it's leaning towards depression, something like that, vata type depression. But initially the ojas has to be there to allow the healing capacity of the body to be optimized. So overindulgence in sex will decrease ojas. Injury or trauma to the body and alcohol are all kind of factors that decrease ojas. And so one of my teachers would often say, hurry, curry, and worry. Those are the 3 things that basically decrease ojas. And so by curry, he basically means like really hot, spicy food, not just like everyday curries. So hurry, curry, and worry. Those, anytime you find yourself doing any of those 3 things, know that your ojas is being depleted to some extent. And try and avoid those as much as possible. Okay. So.
I have a question about the fasting.
Yeah.
Just because, you just hear about yogis that fast and that, then they're able to connect with
Totally.
what I think of as ojas. So I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Is it just?
It's in my understanding of the way that the subtle body energetics go, there's kind of three components or 3 things that are being built. And so one of them is ojas, and the other is prana, which we kind of talked about, and the other one is Agni or tejas. And so ojas is kind of this container, and then inside the container you have both prana and Agni. So prana is kind of the at least within the yogic system, it's the upward moving energy. It's the pervasive energy everywhere. but specifically it's the upward moving energy that gets the kundalini to rise or creates the spiritual experiences. The spiritual experience itself is often considered to be determined by Agni, which is the sacred fire. And so it's the fire of true insight, and the fire of seeing things as they truly are. So being able to see like, oh, this is truth, this is the true reality. We are all connected, we're all made of the same stuff. Like actually having actually being able to see that and have that experience. And so fasting is remarkable for increasing prana and for increasing Agni. So it can create those type of spiritual experiences. But because the prana and the Agni are in the container of Ojas, first the Ojas has to be strong so that you can allow those energies to increase. And so they normally say that for balance, especially psychological balance, you want all three of those to, it's the exact opposite of the doshas. You want all three of those at the same amount of all three of those. So if you have 25% of one, you want 25% of the other two. And the practices that actually work increase all three of those simultaneously. So you go from 25% to 50%. If you get too much Ojas, you can actually start to move towards lethargy, depression, like having too much stability, too much potential energy, so to speak. And then if you get too much prana, then you can get really spaced out. So that the imbalances within these kind of subtle aspects are similar to what we see in Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. If you get too much prana, it looks like a Vata imbalance. If you get too much Agni, it looks like a Pitta imbalance. But if they are rising simultaneously, all at the same rate, then you get all the good juicy stuff from each of them. You get all the insight from the Agni. You get all of the energy from the prana, and you get all of the kind of structural vitality from the Ojas. So that's my understanding.
That's a good explanation.
Yeah. So other questions about those?
I love the factors that decrease. Those are also straightforward, and I can say that when any of those are in my life, definitely I'm not feeling it ever. And it's like I'm trying to get to not have that always, because I notice how quickly it just shifts everything.
Yeah.
You could be doing so good, and if this gets introduced, it's like, don't want to be there.
And I love that concept. Like it's almost like in knowing what we don't want, we know what we do want. You know, it's like in seeing that list and going, oh, okay, that's not what I want. Then you know that the opposite, just like the allopathic way the Ayurveda works, you know that the opposite is the balancing principle. And so it's like, oh, you know, if I don't want negative emotions, that means I want positive emotions. You know, if I don't want a rough or light diet, that means I want kind of a soft, heavy diet. That's going to increase Ojas. So in the diet category, they often say that you want like well-spiced, heavy food. And so basically the information that's come from India is that the things that increase Ojas the most are milk and ghee and almonds and dates. So you'll see like especially on our website, I think it was the rejuvenation. So every fall and spring we do like a month of cleansing, and then we do a month of rejuvenation. And so all the rejuvenation therapies, like the sunflower seed balls and the date nut milkshake and all of that stuff, is really like Ojas building foods. Yeah. So, but then it goes back to like how in order for the tonifying effect of the Ojas building foods to be there, the cleansing has to be complete. And the channels have to be clear, and then you really get those. Otherwise, you could eat all those foods and you just kind of feel heavy. And you're like, oh, I feel really weighed down by all of this good stuff that's supposed to make me feel like more alive and vibrant. And so the cleansing usually needs to take place before. If you're already clean, you're already like functioning well, then just building the Ojas can be the primary approach.
Can you tell when you're clear? Like in most people,
Yeah,
Okay,
I mean,
I'm ready to build now.
yeah.
Just curious.
For most people, I have them monitor their tongue. I think that's the simplest way to tell if you're clear. You know, I can read it in the pulse, and that's normally what I do, because the tongue only gives you an indication of the digestive system. So it shows how healthy and balanced the digestion is, but I can read the pervasiveness of the ojas in the entire body and get a sense like, oh, okay. Or the pervasiveness of ama, which we'll talk about tomorrow, which is the opposite of ojas. So it's kind of the, like when you're working with digestion, you either create ojas, or if your digestion is inefficient, then you create ama. And so you can read both of those. And the tongue is a perfect way to see if you have ama, and that's the toxicity that clogs the channels. So if there is no ama on the tongue, then most likely you're creating ojas with every meal. Yeah.
What does it look like?
On the tongue, it's a thick coating. Everybody has a little bit of a coating, and the color varies based on constitution. But everybody will have kind of a thin coating. But if it's really thick, then that's usually an indication of that. Or sometimes the scalloping around the side, so if it almost looks like you have teeth marks around the side of your tongue. It's
Oh,
like
I've seen
a
that.
discoloration around the side of the tongue. That is also an indication that digestion is inefficient, and especially the assimilation. So that, you know, there's kind of those two stages. There's one, break it all down, digestion, and then there's the other one, assimilate it and make it into new tissue, the second one. And so that ring around the edge deals with assimilation. If you see that, it's like, oh, okay, well maybe I'm breaking down my food, okay, but I'm not assimilating it. But if you have both, then it's like, oh, I'm not breaking down my food, and that's why I'm not assimilating, because the nutritional particles are too large for the system to actually absorb.
Is there a certain time of day you usually is
Best time of day is first thing in the morning. That will give you the best indication, and that's usually when the tongue, the coating's the thickest.
Right.
So it'll give you the best indication of like how efficient the system is going. And we do, on our YouTube channel, we do have a slide cast that basically talks about scraping your tongue. It's super easy. The tongue cleaners are crazy cheap. And it's a good place to start. And it's really less, for me at least, it's less about scraping the tongue and more about monitoring the tongue. Because then if you're looking at your tongue every day and seeing what's going on, then you have a sense of your digestive system.
Right, what you ate the day before.
Exactly, and so it's like a 24-hour cycle. So you look at it and you're like, God, my tongue is really thick. You're like, okay, what did I eat yesterday? Well, I didn't eat very much, but I skipped lunch and then I had this huge dinner. Or like, and then you start to see, you get like immediate results of how those things affect you. So when I teach an experiential nutrition class, even though this is probably not the best way to teach this, I have everybody look at their tongue, and then that evening drink a milkshake, and then look at their tongue the next morning, and you get a clear experience of how hard that is to digest. Because I can say that, and I can say, oh, you know, milkshakes are hard for me to digest. But then when you have this like thick, gooey coating on the tongue, you're like, oh, that's gross. And then you're like, okay, I don't want to do that anymore. Like I don't want that inside me. So you start to, you know, build that experiential understanding of these principles instead of having someone just tell you these things.
So where would oil pulling be a part of this? Because that's another way of detoxifying and
Yeah.
really working with digestion from the beginning,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Isn't it an Ayurvedic practice?
It is. It totally is an Ayurvedic practice. And to the best of my knowledge, I don't, it does do some detoxification, but I think it's more like building. And so the sesame oil and coconut oil both have antiseptic, antibacterial, and coconut oil has antifungal properties. Don't tell the FDA. And so doing the oil pulling basically like optimizes the environment of the mouth, kills all the stuff that doesn't need to be there, so all the beneficial microorganisms can repopulate and create health in the mouth. And like this is like So oftentimes this is the root of the channel. It's like, I call it the food tube. Like, this is the beginning, and then the anus is the end. And so those are like the two passageway points. So you can affect what happens here, and then you can monitor how that affects, what comes out. And so those are the two ways to monitor, like, how is the food tube? How's it doing? So oil pulling can be part of that. So a lot of people will scrape their tongue first and then do the oil pulling. That can be a beneficial way to like get the toxicity out and then really like work with the micro environment in the mouth. So I think that's probably a good place to stop for today. We'll take a short stretch break, bathroom break, water break, whatever you want to call it, and then we'll come back and do herbs.